today I'm going to walk you through all the film gear that I actually use to make comedy sketches and short films. And I think you'll notice something. Depending on the sketch or the film, it's really not that much. But there are cases where I may use a little more gear than others. So I'm going to break these down into 3 different categories, from my most basic setup to my most advanced setup. And I'm going to have a little bonus section at the end for that additional gear that doesn't really fit any of the categories. And my goal with walking you through all the gear that I use is to give you a practical idea of what gear you might use in order to accomplish what you're looking to accomplish. Let's get into it. What's up, gang? Welcome back to the channel. That's about it. Let's just get into it. Okay, first tier 1, the most basic of comedy sketches and short films. This is the bare bones, the minimum gear that I use, starting with a camera. Obviously, I use a camera. Personally, I use the Sony a7 IV. That's my camera of choice. Now let's talk lenses. My most basic of sketches and films, I'm using a 16 to 50 millimeter lens. This lens allows me to get different focal lengths. It allows me to zoom in and out. Now, admittedly, this lens isn't that great, but it gets the job done for me. And sometimes I'm very fortunate to have Marky G on the camera, and he'll sometimes throw his own lens on there, and he uses a 24 to 70 G Master, but these lenses get the job done. Now for audio, I like to use these, the Rode Wireless Go 2s. At this moment in time, I pretty much use these for every sketch or film that I shoot. I like using these as the audio source because I like to get my audio as close to the person speaking on camera as possible, just to get cleaner, clearer audio. And they're small and easy to hide in the shot. So you can literally clip these onto a t-shirt, you can clip them underneath like an outer layer, or if you're feeling crazy, you could tape the lav mic to your chest using some adhesive tape, and then when you take it off, you rip off all your chest hair and it's really painful. Next up, I use a tripod. Now, while I am very fortunate to have Marky G on the camera sometimes, yes, we're still talking about Marky G apparently, when he's not available, I just throw my camera on this tripod. It's a very simple tripod. I've had it for a really long time. It does the job. It's nothing crazy. It was pretty cheap. I still use it for everything. Now, like I said, this is the most basic tier of gear that I use for my most basic sketches and short films. So some examples of sketches and films that I've made with this amount of gear are the ChatGPT short film, How Most People Watch the Oscars, Worst Things to Say to a Photographer, or the Worst Video Editor of All Time. And this whole tier is all the gear that I use to make those. All right, let's move on to tier 2, medium level of gear. Now, some projects I need to use a little more gear because there might be a specific look or feel I'm trying to achieve, so I might incorporate some more gear to help me achieve that. Everything from tier 1 is included into tier 2. So every tier here, you might have plus or minus different tiers, but this is like the one step up from basic, okay? So let's start off with the same camera, but I might introduce some new lenses here. So if I want to get cleaner looking image, I want to get a blurrier background, a more professional cinematic look, if you will, I'm going to start using my 35mm lens or my 85mm lens. A little bit of a longer focal length. They have a lower f-stop, so I get a blurrier background. A great example of using one of these lenses is the beginning intro to the sketch, How People React When You Haven't Seen a Movie They've Seen. I shot that with the 35mm lens. It just overall looks a lot cleaner and professional, in my opinion, than I would be able to get with the 16-50mm lens. Now, a big part of my second tier of gear here... Oh snap, he can rhyme. A big part of this section is going to come down to lighting for me. Now, some sketches and films are going to require specific lighting or specific lighting effects, and that's where my softbox lighting kit from Newer comes into play. I really like this softbox lighting kit. I use them for everything, but when I'm shooting a sketch or a film that I want to have a more cinematic scene, I'll use these lights. An example of using these lights to get a more cinematic lighting setup is the sketch that we shot called Worst Thing to Say on a Film Set. I also mentioned that I like to use these lights when I need a specific lighting effect because these lights have all these special effects that you can do. Like if I want the lighting in the shot to look like there's a TV in front of the character, I'll use these lights. So an example of when we've done that is when we shot Worst Person to Watch Movies With. We set up 2 of these softbox lights and we set their effects to like a TV pulse effect, and that's what it did for the sketch, because it was supposed to look like we were watching movies. I'll also use these little RGB lights from Aperture when I need specific lighting effects or specific colors, or I just need a small little lighting source somewhere. Because realistically, these little RGB lights can do all the same things that my big softbox lights can do, but they're really small. So for example, in the comedy sketch, every beginner filmmaker at some point, there was a chandelier hanging above the table where we were filming. Because the chandelier was there wasn't enough room for me to put a softbox light there to light me, Mark, and Ben. But these little RGB lights have magnets on the back, and I just mounted this light to the magnetic part of the chandelier, set the temperature to what I wanted to be set to, set the brightness, and that became the key light for this sketch. They're just a small, easy way to light scenes in tight spaces. I'm also using them right now. So I'm using the softbox lights to light me, but then I'm using the little RGB lights to light the background here. That's what's giving me that blue and that purple. All right, it's time for the big kahuna. I have never said big kahuna in my life. That's the first time. It's time for the biggest tier, tier 3, the most advanced tier. So again, same camera, but when I want that extra cinematic look and feel, the lens I'm going to use is an anamorphic lens. I have a Sirui 35mm anamorphic lens, and what this lens does is it stretches the aspect ratio of my image to make it look more like that stretched aspect ratio you see in movies. An example of when I've used this lens is the sketch If Phone Calls in Movies Were Realistic. If you go watch that sketch, you're gonna see that it's a wider image. Next piece of gear that we're using in tier 3 is the gimbal. Gimbals are great for when I need to get smooth follow shots or tracking shots, or when I just want additional camera movement in my shorts and my sketches. So for example, in this short film that I made by myself in 5 hours, I made it by myself, but there's a lot of camera movement happening in this short. The gimbal I was using allows me to set tracking points and I can time out the movements, and it creates camera movement for me. I also mentioned it gives me that smooth tracking following shots. Like if you're walking behind a character, instead of the camera being all shaky and bouncy, it'll be smooth and follow along. So for example, in the sketch, How Cars Work in Horror Movies, I shot this with my good friend Robbie. We co-created this together. In the scene where I'm running away to the car, running away from the villain, the camera is following behind me. It's really smooth, but if you saw that behind the scenes, Robbie is full-blown sprinting behind me, but the camera is not shaking because it's on a gimbal. So that's when I'll introduce the gimbal. I currently have 2 gimbals that I use. I have the DJI Ronin SC, and my most recent pickup was the Zhiyun Cinepeer Weeble 3E. What a name. Speaking of camera movement, I may add in a motorized slider. So this I might use when I want the camera to dolly in or dolly out, track left, track right. I can set the speed, I can set the distance. Just allows me to get really smooth shots rather than trying to do it handheld. An example of when I've used this is in my short film, Pick It Up. There's a lot of slider movements happening. Now the last piece of gear that I'll throw into tier 3 is when I want camera movement from a specific perspective. Let's say a sky view, for example. I will throw in the drone. I'll sprinkle in some dronage. I'll sprinkle in some drone shots. I use my DJI Mini 2. Had it for a few years. I still love it. Still works for me. Still does a good job for all its recreational use. You can see this being used as the opening shot to How Cars Work in Horror Movies sketch. It worked great as like an establishing shot. And just a fun fact about that shot, that's actually old footage that I had from years ago that I didn't use, but it happened to work with this sketch because it was the same car. Bonus section. I threw this section in here because there's this category of gear that I have that I use. I don't use it all the time because they're very specific uses. First up, we got the Delkin Fat Gecko Triple Suction Camera Mount. This is a car mount that I use to mount my camera to a car. Wow. When I want the perspective of like the hood of the car looking at a character, I want shots of the wheels, just kind of giving it a different cool perspective, I'll use this mount. You can see it being used in Big Car Guy, short film I shot with Marky G and Benny V. So yeah, that mount is just a fun way to get a cool perspective. But like I said, I don't use it all the time. It's just this thing I use very occasionally. And then lastly, when I'm feeling crazy, when it calls for it, I'll build out my camera rig. I build out the camera rig when I want to maybe use the bigger monitor so I can see better rather than looking at this tiny little screen on my camera. Or I might need to attach other things to my camera, like another handle to carry it easier, or add on the mic pack so I can have it all mounted in one place. But I don't really need that to shoot any of my sketches or short films at this point in time. So that's why I kind of just threw it out. I was like, it is gear that I use. It's just not necessarily necessary, and hence why it's in the bonus section. But gang, that is quite literally all the gear that I use to make short films and sketches from basic to advanced. And like I've mentioned, I think a few times throughout this video, and it might be annoying at this point, it's all plus or minus taking gear from different tiers. I might be shooting a sketch that is on paper, tier 1, very, very basic, but there's a lens from tier 2. There might be a gimbal from tier 3. So it all becomes a spectrum that I use all this gear for. As you add tools to your tool belt, you can build different things. And that's how I look at the different tiers of equipment. So gang, if any of the gear that I talked about in this video today is of any interest to you, all the links to all the gear that I use are in the description below. So feel free to go down there, click on that and explore it. So after watching this video, I hope you now have a more practical idea of the gear you could use or at least need to make the most basic of sketches and films all the way up to more advanced. Thanks for watching. My name is Nate. Keep telling stories, and I'll see you in the next video. Dude, every time I sit in this chair, huge knot in my back left. If a chair company sees this video and you want to hook a boy up, shout out to 47. I love these hats.